If you're not sure what should happen in your story after you get your initial idea, you probably came here looking for answers rather than questions. However, asking the right questions will actually help you uncover more material for your story. If you're new here, hi, I'm Katri and this is Protagonist Crafts, the place for people who are kind of obsessed with the whole writing thing. Every element of your story, whether it's a character, a setting, or a plot event, has multiple directions that it could take you and your story. By asking yourself questions about the things you do know and then answering them yourself, you realize you actually do know what should happen in your story. From this video, you're going to get loads of ideas for new scenes for your story, and eventually you'll be able to put them all together for a full story. The trick to making this work is to write down every single answer that comes to you, no matter how badly they suck. Just write down your answers with no criticism, and it doesn't even matter if they contradict themselves. The questions in this video aren't all the questions that you can and should ask about your story, because it's difficult to come up with specific examples without being able to see your specific story. They should work for all stories though, and I give you some examples for how you can find more specific questions to fit your story. I hope you can't hear it, but I think my cats are getting into my bookshelf and dropping books on the floor. Anyway, let's go and ask some questions. Here are some questions you can ask when you have a character, but not much else. 1. What would be the most interesting place for that character to live in? Most often you want to make your character's life more difficult, so try to think of places where they might struggle. What place would make reaching their goals difficult? Where would they find people to clash with? But of course, sometimes you want to do the opposite, especially if it's something surprising. So what place would be an oddly appropriate place for this specific character? 2. What does your character already struggle with? If you already know some of their flaws, you can think of a primary conflict that this particular character would especially struggle with. If someone is already brave, would it be interesting to read about them saving the kingdom? Probably not. Maybe a brave character requires a different kind of problem that would need different kinds of quality. This is why I'm a writer, not a speaker. Perhaps a brave character would need a different kind of problem that would require different kinds of qualities other than bravery to solve it. Someone more meek could be the more interesting option for saving the world. 3. What would this character never want to happen? You never want to make things too easy for your characters, so think of a way you can make that thing happen after all. Bonus points if, in the end, it actually turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. 4. What would your character never want to do? Can you guess what I'm going to suggest? You're right. Make them do it. Make it the only option at an already difficult time. And 5. How can your character's strengths be a disadvantage and flaws be an advantage? This doesn't just add depth to your story, but also can bring some surprise. What if you have a story idea, a sort of a concept or a premise, but not much else? What if you have something like 6 friends are trying to navigate adult life in New York, or a Norse god is trying to save the world from his brother without his godly superpowers? In case you didn't guess it, those were the premises for Friends and Thor. Or at least I think that's what happens in Thor. I'm somehow distracted every time I watch it. Anyway, the problem with a cool premise or a high concept is that you're going to need a lot more material for your story. A couple of cool scenes isn't enough if you want to write a full novel. Because I don't know what your premise is, it's a little difficult for me to give you specific questions, but let's have a little example and see what we can come up with. Let's say you want to write a story about a time traveler who falls in love way too easily. What questions does that raise? First of all, where did this time traveler come from and how did they get their time traveling abilities? Will they encounter people from their actual past? Are their time traveling abilities always reliable? And what about that whole falling in love thing? Who are the people our time traveler falls in love with? What kind of consequences does that have for those characters themselves, but also for the whole timeline? What will those people do? Are they from different time periods? Now my kitten is playing with a hair tie. Her little paws are coming from under the door. I had to lock them out because they were trying to climb in my closet and they were making a noise. And yeah, I love cats. Anyway, back to the video. How does the time traveler navigate the perils of not writing in different times, traveling in different times? Could time travel and falling in love be at odds with each other somehow? What could a time traveler struggle with emotionally? What could hurt them? Who could they hurt? What's a lesson that they might need to learn that you can tie into the advantages or disadvantages of time travel? How will falling in love with all those different people change them? Hopefully that example helped you find some questions about your premise, but if you need more help, don't be afraid to comment and I will give you some questions. So let's move on. What if you have a plot event or two in mind, but again, not much else? How can you build a story around a single event? Personally, I'd start by looking at story structure and then deciding where in the story does that event go. Is it the thing that puts your story in motion? Is it a surprising event in the middle of the story? Is it where things go wrong the most? Or is it the exciting climax of your story? When you have a rough idea of where this event goes in the timeline of your story, you can start working backwards from it. Let's say you have a character who's at the library checking out her parents' yearbooks, and then the two people with the names of her parents actually look like total strangers. If you wanted this to be the dramatic event at the midpoint of your story, there's quite a lot that needs to happen before that. So how did she get the idea of looking into the yearbooks? And who's trying to cover up the true identity of her parents? How was life already a little odd to begin with? And where are her parents now? Are they alive or dead? Then you need to think of what could logically happen next. Sure, do consider real-world logic, but your biggest responsibility is building in the logic into your story yourself. For example, people are usually happy if they win the lottery, but what if you have a character who actually is saddened by it? You need to put in the reason in the story, and that way you can make it perfectly logical. So what will be the logical next steps after your character finds out the mystery in the yearbook? What will this character do with this information? Will they tell someone about it? Will they tell a loved one or the police? Are they going to act erratically or craft a plan? Will it be dangerous if the parents find out that she's onto them? How will she eventually uncover this mystery? So you might not find your entire plot this way, but at least quite a few steps. Next, let's talk about setting. I've definitely had the problem before that I've seen a cool image and I thought, oh, I'd love to write a story that takes place there. But what kind of questions can you ask about your setting? First of all, who would thrive in this setting? Who would struggle there? Come up with kinds of people for both of those questions. Let's think about Victorian England. Who's going to thrive there? Probably someone who's wealthy and healthy with a reliable income and who doesn't mind following the social conventions of that time. That's kind of boring to read about though. What about someone who's really good at swindling money and getting out of trouble? Someone who's really good at hiding their tendencies and habits that go against the social norms and the laws at the time. That is a little more interesting. And who would struggle in Victorian England? Probably someone who's poor or sick or who does something that you're not supposed to do, like have a child out of wedlock. Next, you need to think about what kind of conflict is inherent in the setting. If you were writing a story that takes place, I don't know, in the Scottish Highlands, you definitely have a lot of opportunities for conflict there. There's the remote location, small communities, unpredictable weather, and that's not even counting the Loch Ness Monster. Setting, of course, isn't just a location, but also time, like we saw in the example in the Victorian England. So consider how different your answers might be when you're writing about the 1950s compared to 1850s. And speaking of time, what kind of history does this place have? What kind of a future seems likely? Asking these questions can also help you come up with more material for your story. Lastly, I want to give you 2 questions that work for any stories and that you can use at any point in the writing process. The first one is, so what? As in, why does it matter? Why would we care? Why would your character care? So your character's parents might not be who they claim to be. So what? Your character ends up on the street after giving birth to a fatherless child. So what? You need to know why it matters so that you can convey it to your readers and they need to know why it matters as well. The next question is a little more fun and it helps you come up with a lot more material for your story. What if? You can also change that to wouldn't it be cool if, wouldn't it be funny if, wouldn't it be interesting if, wouldn't it be scary if, depending on what kind of a story you're writing. And then just come up with all the possibilities that you can think of. And a what if question is also a great starting point for a story. So now you have the questions that help you mine for more story material, but what if all you have are vibes and nothing else? You might want to check out this other video. Or is it that way?
Da, 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 da.